Today I want to show you a visualization technique that changed the way I animate. Let's do it.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. Welcome to a very special episode where I explore some visualization concepts. I was watching a Michael Relth stream the other day and he had a great way of making sure you can keep track of the peaks and troughs of wave animation using this really cool visualization technique. Heartily recommend you go and check him out. He did a 2-hour live stream that was very useful. This is just one thing that I took from it and sort of used it in my way. You can see inside of Photoshop here, I've got a looping sort of tail or wave animation. And if you don't know what these charts are, then congratulations, you're going to get 2 tips in today's video. But essentially, this technique just employs a way of keeping a track of your peaks and your troughs so that you can easily create these beautifully looping, seamless animations. So let's jump right into it then. First thing I'm going to do is just create a new project. We're going to do it at just 12 frames per second. Don't worry about me being in Photoshop or Animate or After Effects or anything like that. This is more of a concept than a direct tutorial. I'm just going to grab up my normal brush here. I've got a pencil brush that I use. And I'm just going to show you something that you may not have seen before. The more traditional animators among you probably have seen something that looks like this, which is the animation chart. It'll be a sort of a horizontal line with numbers above it, something like this maybe. 7 and a 3. And this is basically a tool that classic animators use to make sure that when they hand off their work to other people, they could still understand how the subject was supposed to move. Say, for example, this horizontal line represents an amount of time passing, okay? From left to right, you would then break this up into frames. So on frame 1 would be here. If this was an 8-frame animation, then frame 9 would be at the end. 5 would be directly in the middle, 3 and 7 on either sides of that. And then obviously you'd have 2, 4, 6, and 8 as well. Now, what this chart does is show you 2 things. This is a very quick crash course because this isn't the point of this tutorial. It's just something you need to know to understand it. This chart shows 2 things: timing, the length of time that you'd want this animation to take place. So if this were a ball moving from left to right, on frame 1, the ball would be here. On frame 9, the ball would be here. And then on each subsequent frame, the ball would just move in increments, across the page. Now, these charts can be directly tied to the way an animation should move, like they are here, for example. Or they'd just be like, someone has drawn a little character on their page and they know the character's jumping, and this chart might be off on the side just to show how that character's head might move. Then it might be labeled like head or something. Yeah. Now, the line indicates time passing, in this case 9 frames, and the space between those frames indicates the speed or how much movement should happen during that time period. For example, if I were to have a 9-frame animation that was 5, 3, 7, 2, 4, 6, and 8. So this is frame 1 and this is frame 2. At each of the gaps between these lines were completely equal. That would indicate that the movement that our ball takes across the page would be in equal increments. Okay, now obviously these aren't equal because I'm drawing it quite quickly. But the way you would indicate equal movements is you do these sort of jumping lines between them. If you wanted something to start slowly and end slowly, you would do the same thing. Apart from you would just bunch up your indications of frames to look more like this. Okay. Now, for a visual in motion to show you what that might look like, I've got this little drawing here. I'll open up in Photoshop for you. This is something that I also took from Michael's stream. Very useful. You can think of timing as 12 segments. Say if it's 12 frames per second, 12 equal second. 12 equal segments per second of footage, 1 through 12. Okay. If the spacing between those points is equal, then the movement of your character will be equal. Whereas if you bunch these up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, then your ball is going to move and feel different. Okay. very quick crash course in animation charts, because what I'm going to show you next will teach you more than what that little exercise did just then. Say we've got a waving and wagging tail, and what we've done here is we've kind of defined where the extremities of that waving or wagging tail or piece of fabric is going to sit. Okay. We've done that with these animation charts, which we've broken down into here. We can see 9 frames, or actually 8 frames, with a 9th being the looping frame. And then we've got points which are moving along these frames, and we use those points to track the movement of our animation. So follow along, and by the end of this, hopefully you'll understand how this can be so incredibly useful in a million different circumstances. I made a 12 frames per second canvas here. Again, don't worry too much about that, because it doesn't really matter what software you're using. I'm just going to draw myself a little line. This is going to be the top of our piece of fabric, and I want the start of it to be roughly similar, but then I want it to sort of break apart here until it becomes, its own sense of movement. So maybe something like that. This is going to be the bottom piece of our waving fabric. Now, both pieces are going to start on frame 1. And they're going to be 8 frames of animation. So to do that, you'd need a 9th holding frame. Now, frame 9 in this instance is going to be exactly the same as frame 1. I find it's useful to draw it and then just delete it at the end. So we'll add frame 9 on our bottom piece as well. Now we're going to divide these lines up into segments. So about halfway each one, remembering to follow the angle of what we're using. I'm just going to do I'll frame this in the middle, which is 5. Now I'm going to underline that because I know that's going to be the middle point of my animation. And I'll pick about halfway along this one as well. And we'll do frame 5. Now halfway between 1 and 5 would obviously be frame 3. And in this one, we want it to be equal amounts of movement. So we are going to place them like so. If you wanted this animation to ease in and out, then you obviously could just bunch up your lines, but we want it for the time being to be perfectly equal. So we're going to have 2, 4, 6, 8. Now we're going to do the same down here. About halfway through, we're going to have frame 7. Halfway through here, we're going to have frame 3. Now you can see that this top segment here is traveling in less space over the same time, because all of our equal frame segments are equally spaced. But here we can see the difference between 1 and 3 is a little bit larger than 1 and 3 here. And the difference between 3 and 5 here is definitely larger than 3 and 5 here. Okay, and that's just because of the nature of the line that we drew. 2 and 3, pretty much accurate, but then 4 and 5 here, big differences between them. Okay, so I'm just going to pop 6 in the middle there and 8 in the middle there. Now this is something that we're just going to use as a guide. It's obviously not going to be in our final animation. I'm just going to drag it out to the last 9 frames so that it's there for the entire of our animation here. Okay, I'm just going to add a new layer on top of this with a single frame. I'm going to pop it inside a folder so that I can color it, so it's easier for you to see. But again, you're not really following along in the particular software here. You're following along conceptually. So I'm going to make this layer red. And when it comes to animating waves and fabrics and that sort of thing, you need to think about 2 things. You're basically tracking the peaks and the troughs of your waves. And we spoke a little bit about this in detail in my waves principle animation, which hopefully you've seen. What we need to do is these waves need to move from left to right. And what that will do, these peaks and troughs, tracking them will indicate movement, and it will look like a flowing wave motion. What this visualization technique helps you to do is keep track of those peaks and troughs really accurately and really easily, rather than getting confused about all these overlapping elements. So I'm going to say, for example, I want this wave to have 2 peaks. So I'm going to choose on frame 1, I'm going to choose a peak to be on 1 and a peak to be on 9. Now, obviously at the moment, that would just make the wave look something like this. Peak here, there'd be a trough, and then there'd be a peak here. Where do we determine where that trough is? Well, naturally, you can see that it kind of went down to 5, which just so happens to be directly slap bang in the middle of 1 and 9. So on a new layer, which I'll just quickly add here, excuse me, I accidentally added that inside. On a new layer, which again, I'll pop inside a folder so that I can paint all these blue, for example. Okay. I'm going to draw on frame 5, when frames 1 and 9 have got the peaks here. the trough is going to be on frame 5, even though we're on technically frame 1 at the moment. Don't worry too much about this for now. What we're going to do for now is just move our peaks across our animation page. So we're going to take our layer here and we're just going to add in as many frames as we need to complete the animation. We're going to turn on our onion skin. So we can see on frame 1, we've got 1 and 9, which means on frame 2, if we shift them over, we're going to need peak to be on 2, but this peak on 9 here is now going to be on 10, which is not there. So we'll just ignore that. The next frame, it'll be on 3, obviously. The frame after, it'll be on 4. And the frame after that, it'll be on 5. Now, interestingly, you can see we are halfway through our animation, and our peak is now halfway through the wave. Just remember that. 6, 7, and 8. Technically the end of our loop here. We've added one more frame just to show you that the first frame and the last, if you've been keeping track, should be exactly the same. Okay. So we can see that this dot now moves across our waves in equal peaks. Now, this is what your animation should be doing anyway, but this is just a visualization technique to help you plan properly. So when our peaks are on frames 1 and 9, our trough is going to be on frame 5. So I'm going to add in a whole bunch here. And when we're on frame 2, our trough is going to have moved on to position 6, position 7, position 8, and then halfway through our animation, when our peak is now on frame 5, our troughs are now going to be where they were in the first frame of the animation, i.e. 1, 9. So you can see the direct middle of our animation is the opposite of the start, i.e. 2 red dots, 1 blue dot, 2 blue dots, 1 red dot. Okay, let's continue. It was on 1 and 9, so now it would just be on 2. It would just be on 3. It would just be on 4. And then again, repeating the first frame, it will be on 5. Eventually, that last frame is going to go, because otherwise we will have a duplicate. But for now, you can see that if we play our animation, we've just got some dots moving in perfect loops across our segments, okay? In fact, we can probably do away with this frame now for a moment. If we were to delete this frame for a moment, when we watch that, you should see we've got a perfectly looping animation. Now, again, for reference, I like to leave it in just a little bit longer. Now what we need to do is draw our wave that follows these visualization points, these red and blue dots. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to collapse these down. I'm going to give myself a new folder on top. This one I'm also going to pop inside a group, which I can color green to make it really easy for us to see. And I will add in all the frames that we need to finish this little loop. Now, here comes the fun bit. If this tail were attached to the butt of an animal or something, yeah, so you've got like a little cat's paw or something like that up here. Now, this point would be fixed and it wouldn't move, okay? Meaning that, yes, the wave should technically continue along, this being a peak, this being a trough, this being a peak, yeah? But what you can see is obviously that's going to make it look like the tail's shifting up and down his butt if we do that properly. So it needs to remain in place, okay? All that means is for the first little bit of your wave, you just follow these guidelines that you've drawn because that's the way you want it to move. So you take your first frame. Picturing this as a peak, you're going to be moving down into a trough, back up to the next peak. Simple as that. Remember, you're just trying to make this smooth kind of wave motion. Okay, so if this is a peak, that will be your trough, and that will be your next peak. If this bit can't go up and down because it isn't water, because it's attached to something, then obviously that's going to just change to be that in the direct opposite. Okay. Move on a frame. Now our peak has shifted a little bit. Again, if this were a loose wave, it would be something like that, but it's not. It's attached to this cat's butt or whatever at this point. So leave it attached. Turn on your onion skin so that you can see what your previous frame was. Leave it attached. Continue your trough. Again, your peak is now technically probably about here, yeah? So as long as you bring your line to where that peak would be, you're going to be totally fine. Because we can't see that, oops, I just deleted it. I'll just draw it again. Because we can't see that, what's actually going to happen is it's going to look like our line is just going up and down this last segment. Moving on. Again, it's attached, but now this has moved far away along. So this is, where the cat's butt is, and this is where our peak is now. It's actually going to start to slope back down again because there's enough space for that to happen. So we're on frame 3. This is a peak. It might dip slightly before coming back to this segment here. It would then probably something like that, because again, we've got this wave, this trough following up to the peak which is now like over here somewhere. Yeah, it doesn't matter though, because we're only tracking these points that we can physically see. Can't see it, interpolate where it would go. Again, just toggle on and off your onion skin so you don't get confused about dots that aren't actually there at the moment. But of course, that means our peak still needs to be a peak. Our trough still needs to be a trough. Moving on. Now we've got a trough. This is definitely going to start moving back up again into your peak and your trough. Now we have a trough here, which means that the peak has moved on and the trough is now gone. It means that your peak's just going to drop off here. Moving on, we've got a trough here, up into a peak, down into a trough that is miles away. And again, you would just connect that to where the cat's butt is. I love the fact that it is now a cat's butt. Because we're just about to have a peak come back in, might have the tail moving up slightly. Peak connects with this, and bam, we're back to the start of our animation, which is going to be exactly the same as our first frame here. So we'll just try and make it pretty similar to that, because it's going to be deleted anyway. Okay. Now, let's take a look at what we've got so far. If we were to turn off visibility to our other groups, turn off you down there, and we can turn off. I realize this is behind my head, but I'm literally just hiding layers. Okay. And let's also turn off our guide just to see. There we go. So now we've just got our green shaking tail here. Turn off the onion skin so you can see that a little bit better. Now we can see our flapping tail or our flapping fabric. There's a little bit of a stutter at the end because we've still got that 9th frame on. So what we can do is just remove that from the loop. And there you can see you're kind of just, despite the static nature of whatever this is attached to. Oh, there's one frame there I didn't quite draw all the way. What frame is that? Here. That was my mistake. I'll just quickly add that in. Despite the static frame of whatever this tail is attached to, the peaks and the troughs of this wave have been really accurately tracked using these blue and red visualization dots. And what this means is if you want to, you've actually now got the details of everything you need for, to change this into a flapping piece of fabric. For example, if this were like a towel that was kind of coming this way, like that. So if it was flapping kind of upwards like so, you'd have the tops of the towel here, you'd have like the bottom bits of the underside coming in like that, okay? You can actually add those to your drawing if you want to. Pick the angle of movement. And just draw those lines. Obviously, there's not very many folds in this one. For example, you wouldn't see any of the folded sections here. Let's turn on onion skin. Get that angle a bit consistent. Okay, and this has now stopped being. Here you'd have. See that? This has now stopped being a cat's tail and started being some kind of flapping fabric in the wind. Okay. That would need to go that way. Good. That bit. Okay. Angle down, so I'll just turn off. I'm going to look great because I'm just quickly rushing through this. You get the point. We've been able to really simply, really easily create this kind of flapping motion with a perfect loop of, tracked points, just because of those really simple to follow visualization techniques. So that's the power here, really, the power of these little dots. It's obvious that that's where your peaks and your troughs should be, because that's where you've tracked them using your animation charts. But just the very idea of saying, this isn't, the point at the top of a complicated piece of fabric where it's folded over. This is just a small red dot, which is moving one frame at a time. And that's the thing you're tracking. Anyway, that was the concept. Really useful, I thought. Really powerful for me. It's helped me sort of think about just conceptually how to animate a bit better. Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, you're probably a bit further behind on how you understand animation. I recommend looking into things like animation charts. Just, Google Disney animation charts, something like that. And wave principle animation as well. Just look into those things. And then once you've done that, come back, have a look, and you'll probably see why this is so powerful and into what context you can put it. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Is it tutorial? This exploration, really. If you did, please consider subscribing, liking, turning on notifications, even joining the channel. It really does help. And hopefully I'll see you next time for another episode of TipTut. I'd like to say an absolute chonker of a thank you to Unknown Ghosts, WN62, and my third anonymous level 2 member. You guys are lovely and are keeping the lights on. Thanks very much. If you've made it this far into the video, then please consider joining for exclusive perks such as badges next to your name and shoutouts at the end of each video, just like this one. You know the deal, you're watching the video. Thanks very much everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.